Okay, we're live and welcome one and all to the final one in our series on the Practical CSM Framework. We've made it all the way through the first 6 phases, and we're now going to be looking at phase 7, engagement evaluation. Very exciting. So thank you for those who have been on this journey with me from the beginning, and welcome those who are joining for the first time. And of course, a warm welcome to everyone in between that as well, wherever you happen to be in the world and whatever your time of day it is, whatever you're doing. Very good to have you with us here today. If you're watching this live, then you do get the opportunity, of course, to ask your questions, which you can put into the chat window. Please make sure you address your questions to everyone, and that's so that the other attendees can also see your question, so that when I answer it, it makes sense. And feel free to do that. And not just questions, but if you have any comments or observations, perhaps some experience of your own that you would like to share, you're very welcome to do that. In fact, I would definitely encourage it. And please note that my colleague Gerald has just popped up into the chat window a few links for you: our calendar of live events for the rest of the year, how to access our newsletters, how to evaluate this webinar, which is the one thing that we do ask you to do in return for this free service, please. And we really would appreciate it if you would do that. And how to download our Practical CSM Framework book, which you can access from that final link there on the list. So as I said, please don't hold back. Please do ask your questions or submit your comments as we go through anytime you like. I will keep my eye on the chat window. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just share my screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. And there it is. And then we'll get going. So as mentioned then, phase 7 today, engagement evaluation. We've been through the other 6 phases, but as we always do, we will very, very briefly look at customer success frameworks as a whole first, and then we'll move on to phase 7 engagement evaluation. We will actually ignore that list. My apologies, I didn't update that list. You'll see an agenda for phase 7 in a minute, which will be the correct one. So I do apologize. So ignore that list. We have got some agenda items. That was the phase 6 agenda items. Let's just quickly whip through the customer success frameworks. I'm not going to spend more than, say, about 4 minutes on it. We're just going to cover what they are and my Practical CSM framework, and just identify the different stages and phases of that framework for you, just in case you're not already familiar. So the concept of a framework, of course, is the structure that stands around something to hold it up and to make it more stable and to make it functional. In the words of Sir Isaac Newton, I've seen further than others. If I have done so, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And the concept here is, well, why reinvent the wheel? Why create your own framework, that structure that allows you to, to stand up and be counted, if it's already available for you, and we've already written it and it's there and we've checked it and it's best practice, etc. Why not use that? And then that allows you to go further than you would be able to do by deploying your time to do the things that the framework can't do, to do the specific stuff around your customers and your product. So that's the idea of the framework. It gives you a structure in the sense of a pre-created set of responses to the common challenges we face, and the step-by-step guidance about how to do those responses. So it's a set of activities, if you like. And that process, that framework, is then published. We can train people in it so that everybody knows in advance, if this comes up, then this is what to do, and how likely it is that this will come up, and how to handle it when it does. So we've got it all ready for our engagement with our client, and then we can engage with the client and be much more productive, because we don't have to think about what to do we already know what to do. We've been taught it, and it's documented in the framework. We don't need to work out how to do it. That also has already been documented in the framework. Now, of course, we might need to tweak it a little bit because we are unique with our products. Our customers are unique with their challenges, of course, and that's to be expected. But that's like the Pareto principle here, the 80-20 rule. And what we're saying is, well, it'll take us a long way there. It'll get us 80% of the way there. And yes, of course, we'll still need to make it our own and adjust it to fit the exact requirements that we and our customers have. But it goes a long way towards making us more productive, and also not just more productive, but better quality as well, because we've got this consistency of approach. Everyone on the team does it the same way. It's tried and tested. We know it does work. It enhances productivity because we can now do the same process and just keep repeating it. It allows us to be better at collaboration between and within our team. We can assemble our resources and use one set of resources multiple times. We can pre-approve activities because we know, what level of knowledge and skill is required for them. We know how to measure things. We can measure them more easily. We can put training in place. We can induct new team members more quickly. If we do want to make changes, we make a change in one place on the customized framework, and then we publish it and disseminate it to everybody, and it gives us some way of proving the quality of what we do to any external third parties if we wish to do that as well. So basically, lots of really good reasons why it's worth having a framework for any sort of professional practice, including very much customer success management. Whereas I just can't think of why you wouldn't want to put a framework in place. So, all right, enough about frameworks. The Practical CSM Framework you see here is specific to, of course, customer success management, and it's the same reasons as we looked at before. Efficiency, effectiveness and productivity, higher quality allows us to grow and keeps us strong as we grow. It's written in detail in my book, which is obviously available from all good bookshops. We also do have a PDF version, which we published, which you can access from that link that I mentioned that you can see in the chat window. So do get yourself a copy of that. And there are 3 stages in it: the initial stage, the user readiness stage, and the ongoing stage. If we look at the initial stage, you will see there are 2 phases: preparation, where we get ourselves ready before we meet the client. Then we meet the client and we get their commitment to work with us. So phase 1 preparation, phase 2 commitment. That's in those initialization of the engagement with the client. Then we're going to work with them to get them ready. And that's the meat of the work that we do. And that's included in phases 3, 4, and 5. Onboarding, which is the initial readiness, and then the adoption planning and adoption implementation to get all their users up to complete mastery of all of the processes needed to really get the maximum value out of the use of our product or service. Once they've done all of that, we can move into the ongoing stage, which goes on for as long as they continue to use our product or service, maybe hopefully for many years. And most of that time is spent in value realization, which is, of course, as it states, it's all about how do we make sure that they get the maximum value and how do we measure it and report on it. And we're also on an ongoing basis going to evaluate progress and make sure that we are doing all we can to help them and that they are getting the maximum value from us and we're getting the maximum value from them as well. So anyway, that's all I want to say about the framework in general. Let's now move to the specifics, and let me get the chat window up in case you want to talk to me. No messages as yet, but I am still hopeful. So would love to have you talk to me in the chat window. I do have it in front of me ready, so feel free as we move forwards. Okay, so this is the correct agenda for phase 7. So we're going to look at what happens, we're going to look at the activities and outputs, the central repository, and measuring customer success. So what happens in the engagement evaluation phase? So this is really slightly different to the other phases in the sense that whereas the others are working in the business doing the thing we do, you could argue that this is not that. This is taking a step away and looking at what we do and assessing and evaluating, well, how good a job are we doing? So that's really the idea of the engagement evaluation. And we could argue, in fact, as you can see, that it's not like a step like the others. You do preparing, then you do commitment, then you do onboarding, then you plan the adoption, then you implement the adoption, then you realize the value. It's more like something that's an ongoing thing that we should be doing all the time, is asking ourselves the question, is what we're doing good enough? Is what we're doing as good as it could be? How can we improve upon what we're doing? If we are doing something well, can we templatize that and do it again in the future in a more efficient and effective way? Can we train others on our team on what we've done and maybe help them to be more efficient or effective or higher quality, or get better results? So this is really what the engagement evaluation is all about. It's about ourselves and the entire team becoming stronger over time. So also in engagement evaluation, where we spot something that we've done well, but let's celebrate. So celebrating and rewarding successes is great, and a success could be a learning as well. So a success could be actually spotting a failure, spotting that we haven't done something as well as we can and fixing it, or taking the steps to fix it, or starting to take the steps even to fix it, is a massive success as far as I'm concerned. So just to explain what I mean by a success is us moving forwards, and moving forwards only really comes from making improvements. So we should be rewarding and celebrating when we have the opportunity to do so. And so also in this engagement evaluation, we could say new tools and techniques could be maybe documented and shared. So maybe someone's got some ideas that they bring to the forum. We can discuss them, decide, is this appropriate for us? If so, how do we then update and change what we currently do? Do we need to change our process? Do we need to change our playbook? Do we need any training on this new way of doing things? Do we need to try it out in role play, or what do we need to do to make sure that we're good at it before we get in front of the customer, and then let's try it out and measure it and report back on it? So things like that sort of process would be in the engagement evaluation phase. And where we have encountered problems, as we encounter them, it's really a good idea just to make a note, better than just a mental note, because mental notes, if you're anything like me, maybe it's my age, but yeah, I can forget that I've made that mental note. I really must improve on X. And then what was I was going to improve on? Oh, I'm too busy. I'll worry about it another time. And then I never do improve on X. And then next time I'm engaging in a similar situation with a similar problem or challenge that a similar client has, I still haven't learned how to deal with X. And I still don't do as great a job as I could have done. So when we encounter a problem or an issue or a challenge, note it down and think, right, that's something for me to learn more about. That's something that I need to bring to my next coaching session with my manager, or that's something that I'm going to suggest we all get training on, because I think as a team we're weak on it, or whatever the situation might be, whatever's appropriate. That I don't think we've got the right tools to do this. I'm going to ask if we can maybe have a tool that will help us to do that, or change the existing tool to allow additional functionality, whatever the situation might be. So that also is very much in the engagement evaluation phase. So we've already really talked about the why of this. We're going to be much better at our role if we can do that. So the personal qualities in this phase that we might come to the fore: enthusiasm and energy. This is one of those tasks which could be set aside because it's not as urgent as a customer facing, the customer's demanding we do it right now type task. This isn't like that. This is we have to make sure that we do this. The client isn't going to ask us to refine and improve ourselves on an ongoing basis. They're just going to expect us to be refined and improved, but they're not going to give us the time. We're going to have to find the time to do it. Okay, so that's going to come from ourselves. So you can see things like determination to succeed, enthusiasm and energy are going to be really important to this, and we're going to need to be able to listen and question, but this time it's ourselves as much as anything else. Listen to ourselves, question what we are saying and what we are doing, research and analyze what others are doing and the best practice techniques that are out there, and think about the issues and the challenges we have, and do some creative problem solving. What else could we do? How else could we tackle this problem that we're not using currently, that we could maybe deploy? And leadership and influencing of others to then, to train and to evangelize and to explain, well, this is what I think we need to do. Okay. So the activities and the outputs then. So we're going to review the work that we've completed in our customer engagement to this stage. Now, if you recall back, I'm just going quickly back to a couple of slides, actually to this one, where we can see here, this is the overall image, the graphic for the phase. Again, we've got going around the outside, or the middle part, I suppose I should say. The outside's got the 3 stages, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Then in here, in stage 1, first 2 phases, preparation, commitment. Stage 2, the next 3, onboarding, adoption, planning, adoption, implementation. Then we've got value realization and engagement evaluation, which we've stuck into stage 3 because we've got to explain it at some stage. But actually, as we've said, in reality, we like to think of engagement evaluation as just being something that we're doing all of the time. Except, of course, we can't do it all of the time because we need to do the other 6. So actually, we're doing the other 6 phases the majority of the time. And then perhaps, and that's working on our job, doing our job. Working in our job, doing our job, my apologies, and then to work on our job, to work on ourselves in engagement evaluation, taking a step back. What are we doing well? What are we not doing so well? What do we need to spend some time on? That's more like a sort of a 5 to 10% of our time sort of job. The problem is no one gives us that 5 to 10%, and it will get filled by phases 1 to 6 if we allow it to happen. And if our manager also doesn't help us to assign some time to improving our game as an individual and as a team. So, by the way, don't rely on your manager. Some managers are wonderful, some managers are average, and some managers are poor. All right, that is the nature of work. As you go through your working career, those who've been, who are more senior, been around long enough, will, I'm sure, agree with me. They've worked with some fantastic managers, and most are, but not everybody is. You can't have your career determined by other people. You've got to take responsibility ultimately. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that they don't have a responsibility as your manager, but what I'm saying is don't let that be the be all and end all. If it's not happening as a team, then you need to make it at least happen a little bit for yourself. You need to spend some time evaluating and your engagements and thinking about how, even if you're not going to get help from the company and from the team, how you can actually for yourself improve your game, become better. And if that company is not actually supporting you to evaluate your qualities and improve yourself, then in the certainly in the medium to long term, then one of your things about your engagement evaluation might be, where will I be going from here? So anyway, there we go. Going back to what we were talking about then. So we're going to review what we've done for the customer. We're going to, on a regular basis, and we're going to take regular steps and stages. So at the end of maybe our research, at the end of getting the customer committed and getting a success plan signed, when we've onboarded a new client and they understand what they're meant to be doing, when we've developed an adoption plan, when we've implemented the phase 1, when we've got to the first business review, when we've got to the first 12 months and they're signing to renew their contract. These would all be obvious points where we could step back and hit. It's a milestone, so it's a nice point from which to evaluate the engagement. What have I learned from this that I can apply to other clients when I'm in this same situation with these other clients in the future, for example. and capture it all. Capture your best practice, capture any tools or templates that you've developed or created, a presentation that you've done, templatize that business review report that you made that they really liked, that was in a different style to the one you've used before, and start using that then on an ongoing basis, because you've spent that time documenting it, templatizing it, getting it ready. Share with everybody else on your team if that's what you need to do. Also think about any mistakes you've made, or any lessons learned about things that didn't go well. Meetings that were uncomfortable, or that went on too long, or didn't have enough time, or didn't really get to the end result, and think about why that was and how they could be improved in the future. What would it need? What would it take? Is it you? Is it them? Is there training that you need? Are there skills that you require? Do you need some help and some coaching? What will solve the problem if there's been a challenge or a problem and it didn't go so well? And overall, as you do this more widely and more strategically, develop your own personal career vision for yourself. Where is it that you're heading? In what direction? This may be something that you gradually uncover rather than for sure initially, and that's absolutely fine and probably a good thing. But then design and plan your own milestones for improvement around these goals and targets that you have, even if they're not really fully formed as yet. If you can, then meet as a team to do this, and have perhaps both regular formal reviews and maybe also more informal sort of water cooler type conversations as well. Contribute not just to the content within your customer success team, but also to the management and maintenance of your team as well, and act as a good team player. Help your team members. Coach them in what you've learned as you become more senior. Allow them to reach out to you to give your assistance again as you learn and you become more senior in what you're doing. And as we said earlier, celebrate your successes, celebrate your team's successes as well. So what is the output from phase 7? Well, unlike the others, which is usually some kind of documentation on here's where we're up to with client X that allows us to now move to the next phase of our engagement with client X, this is more about us. So the output, as it says there, is kind of like a better us. That may be all sorts of things. It may be some more detailed playbooks. It may be a better written process for something. It may be a different process. It may be a new tool or new features and functions of a tool. It may be a new agreement between ourselves and some of our colleagues about who will perform what actions. So there's all sorts of things that could come out of this, but basically it is an improvement to the quality of the service ultimately that we offer our clients. And that's really what we want. So it's an overall improvement to ourselves and our team. So what will the client get from this? Well, of course, what the client ultimately will get moving forward over the long term is the best possible customer success management service from our organization, even if we leave it for years to come, hopefully. Okay, so that's the idea, and that's really the basis of this. But in the short term, what they might get is some certain improvements as we move forward. But this is about, I see it more as being like like little 1% improvements all the time that don't really look like much at the time, but taken over 2 or 3 years, they'll add up to so much better a team than it was 2 or 3 years back. So actually, I would say it's a subtle thing generally. Sometimes there could be a massive, very measurable change that takes place, a sudden realization, we've been doing it completely wrong, let's do onboarding it completely differently. That could happen, especially maybe in the very early stages. But generally, once we've settled and we've been doing customer success management within an organization for 12 months, 24 months, 3 years or more, then those sort of bigger step changes are less likely ever to occur, and it's going to be more incremental than massive step change, I would suggest. But that's fine, doesn't matter. What value will a company receive from the engagement evaluation? Well, same thing, obviously. So what are we doing? Well, we're helping our customers attain their outcomes. We're making sure that the investment that's put into customer success management actually generates the maximum return. We're making sure that we can measure and report on progress. We are actually reporting on what we learn back to the product team, to the customer experience team, to the marketing people. We're reporting and discussing and collaborating inside our team and with other teams. So there's all sorts of value that's going to come from engagement evaluation. Okay. Turning slightly then to a specific topic, which is the central repository, which, again, if we go back to the diagram of the entire Practical CSM framework, it's picked out in orange here, and it's in the middle of the diagram now. And the reason why, obviously, it's called the central repository is because this is the concept of, rather than have silos of data or information or knowledge or skill, we actually have a central repository of all those things, so that when that skill or that knowledge or that data is required, it's accessible and can be applied to that client engagement, which might be a certain person, or it could be some information that is held, or it could be a tool, whatever it is. But the point is that it's centrally available to whoever needs it. Of course, central repository then is a very important aspect, and it's something that we need to have both internally as our resource within the customer success team, but also, very importantly, quite a lot of the stuff that we use, and particularly I'm thinking of the data that we will be using, we'll need to share with sales and account management and marketing and product and finance and legal, etc. And so actually we may not own all of that data, but we need it to be logically centralized for us so that we can access it, and similarly centralized for them so that they can access it. The basic rule about storing data, or indeed anything, is we want to store it once in one secure location, so that we don't end up with version control issues where I've edited my version, you've edited your version, so neither version is now fully up to date, and that's useless. Or also, of course, where we end up with multiple versions that we're not controlling, and it becomes a security issue. So we want to try and make sure that we can control and manage our data at a central location. I would recommend that somebody is assigned to manage that central repository on behalf of the customer success team, and obviously works and liaises with other teams in doing so. But it's their overall responsibility to make sure that information stored is accurate, is up to date, is only stored once, that there is version control, that any data that is no longer required, that is like GDPR type personal data, is destroyed, and so on and so forth. So I would say that is a job for somebody. It's not a job for somebody when there's only 3 or 4 of us, but as we grow as a team, ultimately, that might even become someone's core focus in their work. So the overall concept of the repository, and indeed of the entirety of the framework as we see displayed here now, is this concept of it being cyclical rather than linear. So we want to illustrate this concept of it being not just linear but also cyclical. Both occur. So yes, we might start off with stage 1, then move to stage 2, and then stage 3, and we go through phases 1 to 7 in kind of that order, or certainly phases 1 to 6. As we've said, phase 7 is a little bit different. That's a linear progression, but we can move forwards and backwards to any point in this wheel of the framework at any time to do any of these tasks, and we can join it halfway through, and we can do some of the tasks more, and sometimes we'll do some of them less, depending upon the needs of the client. So my point here is, of course, is that any framework is important, and a framework should give structure, but that structure needs to also be flexible enough to be able to bend with the needs of a particular client engagement. Okay, so which is sort of covered here, so that's fine. So I want to now turn in the sort of second half of our conversation to how we measure customer success. Now, measuring the client's success, that is done in phase 6. If you remember from last month, what was phase 6? It was value realization. Let's go back and have a look. Okay, there it is in green, value realization. So whose value are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the client's value. It's them realizing their value. So how to measure and report on that, that is in phase 6. But what the client is less concerned about, quite naturally, is our success as a customer success team. Their responsibility is to maximize their success, and they quite rightly should expect our help to do that. That's value realization. What we're now talking about is how we measure the customer success team to see if it's being successful, to see if it's actually producing an ROI for our company, and if so, how much, to see if it's improving and getting better or standing still or not actually getting worse, maybe. Okay, so there are a number of different ways in which that is often done. And what we're looking at here is some of the tools that are often used for internal measurement and reporting purposes. We're not going to necessarily report any of this to any of our clients or even to our shareholders. This is perhaps purely internal inside customer success, or it is used by the customer success team to justify our existence to the senior management team and to help them with their decision making about how they need to invest in customer success services or some combination thereof. So it's more of an internal thing, if you see what I mean. So let's just take a look at some of this stuff then. So let's start with the churn. So we've got churn first of all come up. So the ratio of customers who do not renew their contracts expressed as a percentage. So if we had 100 customers last year, 80 renew this year, well, then we would have a 20% churn. Okay, well, that's the basics of it there. Okay, you might also have one extra new customer. So we might have had out of our 100 from last year, 80 might have renewed. Maybe we also won 30 new customers. That does not get included in our churn statistic because, of course, it's nothing to do with whether contracts got renewed or didn't get renewed. That'll be what they decide to do next year because they were net new. So you ignore the net new. Next year's churn will be based upon the 80 plus the 30. This year, we're basing it upon last year, which was 100. Last year was 100, 20 left, 80 stayed. Our churn is 20%. So that's a nice sort of simple figure. And of course, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for a smaller churn as possible. It's like the leaking bucket, isn't it? So if you imagine we've put a bucket underneath a faucet, we turn the faucet on, and that's like new customers coming in to fill up our bucket with revenues. Lovely. But if there's a hole in the bucket, then however much we turn on the faucet, maybe we never fill that bucket. And if you can imagine a hole that was exactly the same size as the amount of water coming in, well, then the amount of water generally in the bucket stays the same. If you imagine the hole is bigger, well, then actually the amount of water in the bucket gets less. So if we've got more churn than we've got new customers coming in, we'll end up with less customers. Vice versa, if we've got less churn than we've got new customers coming in, then we will end up with more customers. And if we've got no churn, then we'll end up with the maximum number of customers. Okay, so that's what we really want to do, is we want to try and make the hole in our bucket as small as possible in order to fill up that bucket as quickly as possible as we add new customers to it. By the way, you could also argue that it's not just about new customers, it's also about getting more value out of existing customers. And if you said that to me, then I would entirely agree as well. But we're not currently looking so much at revenues as numbers of customers here. We're just using a very simple rate of numbers of customers or numbers of contracts rather than the revenue value of them in this particular statistic. But we could get a little bit more clever and we could say, yes, but what about the actual revenues? Because that depends not just on the number of customers, but the size of the customer, how much they're buying from us. But which is what I mean, really. I mean, it doesn't matter whether they're a small customer or a large customer. If they're buying a lot from us, or buying not so much from us, that's what's really of interest. So it's the size of the revenues from their contracts that we're interested in, particularly. So we could do an ARR, an annual recurring revenue. So it's not looking at stuff that is just one-off sales, like a hardware sale or maybe a professional service where we went in and consulted that is not renewed on a regular basis. So ignoring that stuff, that is not included in ARR. It's just looking at measuring and the recurring revenue generated, as it says there, from subscriptions, contracts, and other recurring bills. So is that going up or down? So what we can do then is we can look at it either on a monthly basis, which is MRR, and then multiply by 12 to get ARR, or we could look at it on an annual basis to get an ARR and then divide by 12 to get like an MRR equivalent. And why would you do it one way or the other? Well, probably because of the model of your recurring contracts. So if most of your clients are maybe they're B2C clients with monthly contracts, you might choose to do MRR. It's more meaningful to your business. If, on the other hand, you mostly have business clients and they're mostly on 1, 2, or 3 year contracts, well, then you can annualize those to 12 months and use a 12-month year-on-year statistic like ARR. The actual statistic you can see here, the actual calculation, is the sum of the recurring subscriptions in this year plus any add-ons and upgrades in this year added together. And then once you've added those together, you subtract the lost recurring subscriptions from the previous year and also any recurring revenues from add-ons and upgrades in that year. And by the way, add-ons and upgrades in both cases means that are in the contracts, not that are one-offs. Okay, so all of this is talking about contractual stuff, basically how much more this year than last year, subtract one from the other, and we'll end up with a figure. So if you're thinking, what on earth are you talking about? Here is a worked example, because sometimes it's so much easier to see an example. Okay, so there you can work it through. We sold 120 million and a further 10 in add-ons and upgrades this year. We lost 20 million from previous contracts that weren't renewed, and we had taken 30 million in add-ons and upgrades last year that we're not going to allow for this year. We're allowing for the 50 million this year, not the 30 million of last year. So basically that comes to 170 this year minus 50 last year, which is 120. And if you were just to divide that by 12, you could give yourself some semblance of an MRR of being around 10 to work on what does that mean monthly basis. But you could also do it the other way. There are other slightly more complicated sort of calculations, and you can include various other things, but that is the basis of an ARR. And of course, it's the average recurring revenue within the period, in this case per annum, that we're looking at here, but it could be per month. And what does that tell us? Well, we can then say, is this, what's the trend? Is that number going up or down over the last 5 or 6 years? And if it continues, then what will we be aiming at over the next 5 to 6 years? And is that progress sufficient, or do we need to actually increase the growth? And if so, how are we going to do that? So these are the sorts of questions that managers will be asking themselves as they look at the ARR figure. Still with me? No one's asked any questions. Give me a I am here in the chat window if you are here. CSAT, which was actually, I think, top of the list when we looked at the list, so my apologies, but seemed to drop down in the details. Customer satisfaction rating is what CSAT stands for. And it's often a simple survey where we just ask them, thank you, David. Great, Himran. It's nice to know I'm not talking to myself. Lisa, thank you. So, we want to maybe ask our customer, are they happy with us? And we can ask them maybe for a simple rating, rate out of 5, out of 10, out of 100, or just red, amber, green, or whatever we want to do. Okay. If we ask like one client, what did you think? Well, that's an opinion, and nothing wrong with an opinion. Yeah, I'd give you an 8. Well, that's nice, but maybe they're just a really nice person. Maybe they're having a really good day. Maybe they're having a really bad day. Maybe they're the type of person who's hypercritical. Maybe they're the type of person who always gives good results or always gives bad results when they're asked to be surveyed. What's my point? My point is that something like this, where you're asking for somebody, Magdalena, very warm welcome to you from Berlin, is that, you know, one or two data points are really not very meaningful. You need to have, you know, hundreds, preferably thousands of data points. The more data points you have, the more meaningful the average of that data is, because it includes a wider range of opinion. So CSATs are very useful. They're useful for determining, again, the direction of travel, because if the average is an 8.5 out of 10 this year, and it was 7.9 last year and 6.8 the year before, then we're moving up. Great, and we can sort of see where we're going to be next year if we continue in that direction. So it's really useful for seeing whether customers are happy with us. Also, it mentions there that the concept of a leading indicator, very important concept. And a leading indicator is not actually the thing we really want to measure, which is probably revenue for most companies. But we may see that our customer satisfaction might go up first before we see any actual change in our revenues. But the fact that customers are more satisfied means they are likely, not absolutely definitely, but are likely to stay with us longer and buy more from us. Would you agree with that? You know, in broad principle, if customers become more satisfied with us, they are likely to stay longer with us and buy more from us. Now, if you agree with those 2 points, then you can also immediately see how you may not get additional revenues for a while, because it's going to take a while for companies to stay longer. If the average time they spend with you at the moment is 5 years, it's going to take 6 years before you see any difference. But the fact that they're more satisfied means they're more likely to stay longer, which means you might raise the average customer lifetime to 6 years instead of 5, which means that you're going to get more value out of them, which means that you're actually going to see more revenues ultimately. So it could be a leading indicator of future revenues. Agnesa has asked a question: how to encourage clients to participate in the CSAT survey? And this is a very good question. And of course, we need to be very careful here not to influence them to give an answer that is not true, unless that's what we want. Okay, so we might be doing a survey to try and prove to the world how wonderful we are. Well, okay. But if we really want to do a survey to find out the reality, we've got to be very careful not to be too pushy with the client, because we could either annoy and upset clients by being really pushy, in which case they give us a lower CSAT rating. 5 out of 10. They're always annoying me with surveys. Or you could be also, if you, for example, incentivize your account managers to say, well, you'll get a bonus if your clients all give you a 9 out of 10 or higher. What are they going to do? Yeah, they're gonna put a private call in and say, look, do us a favor, will you? Give me a 9 or a 10, will you? It means so much to me, and I'll make sure you get a good discount next time. And so you've got to be really careful how you do these things. And there is, of course, in fact, there's an entire career based around research techniques and how to survey audiences, etc. So don't bombard your clients with lots of surveys. Keep the survey short. They're much more likely to answer 1 or 2 questions than a whopping great big form that takes an hour to fill in. Make sure that the language you use is very simple to understand and cannot be misinterpreted. Make sure that they can that it is easy to use and understand, and and a pleasant experience to do so. Make it online. Make it so they don't have to write anything. They can just press buttons. Yeah, so you have to write the number 1. They just tick for number 1 or whatever. So those are some of the ideas. And also think about when you're going to be doing these as well, because you might find that there are steps in the customer journey where they are happier, generally speaking, with the service, and steps in the customer journey when their happiness tails off a little bit and they're a bit more frustrated with us. So it might be interesting actually to do CSATs if you've got enough data, if you've got enough data points, you've got enough customers to actually deliberately run your CSAT at different stages of customer engagements, which might tell you, help you to understand where the frustrations lie in the customer journey. I hope that was of some help, Agnesa. So here's an example of using CSATs as a leading indicator. Over the last few years, we've gathered in this data. And if we now extend the line of the last 5 years of data, if we extend that out, we can see that if we continue the way we're going, we've got up to 2021. But if we carry on into 2022, 2023, 2024, this was done a few years ago, then we will eventually hit our 10, roughly somewhere between 2024 and 2025. But that, of course, assumes that we can just carry on a linear improvement. Now, is that realistic? Can you get to 100% like that? I mean, in nature, most things start to bottom out, don't they? And it's much harder to get the same percentage level improvement right up that top, coming up to 10 out of 10, than it is making a percentage improvement between 8 and 9. Between 8 and 9 is easy. Between 9 and 10 becomes harder. Between 9.5 and 10, harder still. Between 9.9 and 10, that's really difficult. So in fact, we might need to think about that and actually think that probably by that time we won't have achieved 10 out of 10. We may actually find a linear direction won't work, and we've got to have more of a curve, and we need to think that we're going to be more expecting something like a 9.5 as our ultimate there, and maybe we're just going to squeeze in as we move into 2025, improvements there, which will be much slower. What's your opinion about sending CSAT and NPS surveys as one? We'll look at NPS in a second, and do feel free to ask your question again at that stage, but we haven't got to NPS yet, so I don't want to answer that until we have. So net revenue retention, NRR, is very popular. It's been one of the ones that's really sort of taken off in 2022, 2023 for very good reason. I love it. I think it is a very important measurement for us to take about customer success. It's a ratio, okay? So it's a percentage. It's the ratio of revenues retained from the last period. So it's not, so ARR is a value, but NRR is a ratio. So it tends to be a little bit easier to do comparative analysis with ratios because we're used to that, the percentage and the difference between different percentages. So if it's over 100%, it means we're growing. If it's under 100%, it means we're shrinking in our revenues. And if it's exactly 100%, then we did the same as last year. Okay, so that's what NRR is telling us. So again, let's just do a worked example. Let's say we're doing this monthly. So we're going to look at the last month. So it's per period, whatever your period is. So all those words where it says last month, this month, this month, it could say last year, this year, same concept. That's absolutely fine. So last month you had 100,000 in renewable contract revenues. This month you have upsells of 25k. And downgrades. So some clients actually said, we don't need that feature anymore, of 5k. And also some clients just didn't renew. So we have 100k in renewables, 25k upsell. So that gives us 125k. Downgrades of 5k. So that takes 5k off again. So we're back down to 120k, and we lost 15k. So we'll take that off as well, which leaves us with 105k. So 105k compared to last year's 100k, or last month's 100k, means a 105% improvement this month over last month. So we got 100% of last month plus an extra 5% is what that is saying. Okay. And as I said, whether you were talking about months or years or decades or every 3-year period, doesn't matter. It's it's a ratio of the periodicity that you choose to calculate based upon. So mostly monthly or annually is the ones that be most commonly used. So it's very, very useful. And if you are consistently getting an NRR of say 120% as a SaaS company, then you're growing very well. And if it's 130%, you're growing really exciting. That's a really exciting value between sort of 115 and 130%, and your investors are going to be very happy with you. Okay. If it's under 115%, they may be less happy with you, unless there are reasons. So that it could be sometimes that you, having looked at all of these revenues, actually you're not so interested in revenues as in numbers of customers, because you've agreed with your investors your strategy actually is not to grow revenues right now, but to grow the market, even if it costs you money. And we've seen plenty of companies who have used that as a very, very powerful strategy. Apple is an example of a company who used that as a strategy, for example. So it's not the entire picture, and you've got to remember this, right? Any one of these statistics, and that's a classic example. You can't just go to a company, go NRR 105. Oh, forget it, you're useless. Well, you don't know the whole story. It's one statistic, and that is like looking at a map and then looking at where you are and seeing something that is on the map and going, well, I must be here. But really, you need two or three things to triangulate yourself around where you are. There's that over there, there's that over there, and there's that behind me. So actually, I'm in this middle here of those 3 points. You need 3 points to triangulate yourself on a map. Same concept here. You need more than one statistic to really tell you what a business is doing. Okay, so it's really, really important you understand that if you didn't already, which I'm sure you did. So why did I bother telling you? Well, what the hell, I like the sound of my own voice. So here we go then. NPS, Net Promoter Score, which Agnieszka mentioned earlier. So that's a measurement of customer sentiment, and it's a very, if you're not familiar with it, probably are. It's a very specific question that you're meant to ask. How likely are you to recommend product X, or us as a company, or me as a person, to a friend or colleague? And then you give them the options from 0 to 10 to choose from. So it's the same question every time, and it's the same options 0 to 10. And that's all they're shown. And then they answer that. And then you then obviously then collect that data in. And what you then do is you add up all of the numbers of people, and you see how many gave you a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 0 up to a 10. And then you do your math. And the way that the math works is you ignore what they call passives. So anyone that gave a 7 or an 8, well, look, a 7 or an 8, if I give somebody a 7 or an 8, it means, yeah, they're okay. I might use them again, I might not, but they were okay. I mean, they weren't phenomenal, but neither were they really poor. So they're passive, right? So we'll ignore those. If it was a 6 or less, then if I gave a 6, then it's 6. Well, they just about scraped into, I'm not going to complain, but I'll probably look around next time. A 0 is, I would never work with that company ever again. Yeah, but anywhere between 0 and 6 is a detractor. If I gave a 9 and certainly a 10, then of course I'm saying, yeah, they're great, or even they're fantastic. So promoters are 9 to 10, detractors are 6 and below. Passives we'll ignore. And then what we'll do is we'll just find out what percentage of our responses were detractors, what percentage were promoters, and subtract the detractors from the promoters. So if we had, in this instance, let's say we interviewed 100 people, and we got these scores back, and 60 of them were promoters, and 25 of them were passives, and 15 were detractors. Well, we'll ignore the passives. So the fact there are 25 of them is irrelevant. We'll ignore that, and we'll just use the 60, which is the promoters, minus the detractors, the 15, and that gives us our NPS. So it sometimes is shown as a percentage, but I would not say it actually really is a percentage. I would just say it's 45 and wouldn't put the percentage sign, but you do see it as a percentage sometimes. So 60 minus 15 in this instance is my 45. So again, just like we saw with the CSAT, if you only ask 5 people, yeah, you're not going to get much of a accurate response because it's going to depend on those individuals. Whereas if you've got enough people and you ask them, then all of those individualities kind of even out over the spread, and so you get a more representative answer. So there we go. So what's a good NPS? Anyone? What would be a good NPS? If you fancy answering that, feel free. And whilst you're thinking about that, I'll just read out what Magdalena said. Thank you. I've seen companies sending NPSs to all of their customers at the same time or individually one by one after contract renewal. What's better? So it's a good question. We'll ask ourselves that. Anyone thinking what a good NPS score is? Well, and feel free if you want to put anything in, but I will, just because of time, I will move on. I would say a good NPS score really does depend on who you are and what you do. So if we look at, there are companies that go out there and research net promoter scores in different industries. So we're looking at consumer industries here: grocery, insurance, software, retail, hotel industry. Car rentals doesn't do very well, does it? Consumer payments, well, that's particularly bad. It's actually a negative value. Okay, nobody likes consumer payment services. Okay, things like PayPal. So that gives you some idea for those, and maybe more interesting to yourselves to compare what you do, depending upon what industry you're in. Here's some research by another company, clearlyrated.com in this instance, on B2B services. And you can see what's quite interesting is actually a lot of these, or the average NPS of B2B services, what have we got there? They're all in their sort of 30s and 40s, aren't they? There's one in a 60 and there's one that's a 20. Okay, but they're mostly in their 30s to 40s. So it's probably around, what, 40 or something like that, would you agree? As an average, if we go back here, they're everywhere up to 33, but from sort of 5 to 33. So maybe what would it be at 20? Would you say? So maybe it's an average of 20 there. Maybe it's an average of 30 here. Perhaps, I don't know. But you can see here that B2Bs tend to work harder on customer satisfaction. Why might that be? Any ideas? I would suggest it's because they probably have less numbers of customers. Okay, and so every customer is more precious to them. So they have to work harder to make sure to keep that customer, I would say. So we've only got a couple of minutes. So Magdalena, when should we send NPSs? I think that's a complicated question. We need a strategy on it for sure. Either could work, but I think, and it will depend upon the size of the organization, the amount of data. I think that these should be done regularly. When you do it, you should know why and how you're going to be doing it, and make sure that it's balanced and even. I know it's not a brilliant answer, but probably the best we got in just the moments that we had. And what's your opinion about sending CSAT and NPS surveys as one? Agnesa, I would separate them personally. Not all organizations do. I would do my NPS on its own. And then I might then, and actually CSAT also, I might then do a follow-up. And by the way, what both of these have in common is they are just quantitative data. They don't tell me why someone has rated me a 6 or a 5 or a 9 or a 3. Okay, so having got for example, if we go back to CSAT, wherever it was, I've lost it now. Well, let's say they rate us out of 10. Well, it might be interesting to find out if we had a sufficient number of clients rate us 3 out of 10. Might be interesting to know why, mightn't it? So start with a quantitative research like this, and then pick some questions to ask and move to a qualitative research where you don't go to all thousands of your clients. You just reach out to a handful and you ask them, look, would you do a more meaningful survey with more detail, or maybe even come in and interview them and then find out more? And that's a qualitative piece of research there. So quantitative first, followed by qualitative. So anyway, there we go. I mean, we've covered what I wanted to cover. in just about the time that we meant to. So we've looked at what happens in the engagement evaluation phase, the activities and the outputs, the fact that we need a central repository, and some ideas just touching on how we can start to measure ourselves internally and how well we're doing. Nothing to do with phase 6, which is around our value realization for the client. This is about us and how well we're doing. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Please do fill out the evaluation, which you can see the link for right there that Gerald has just put in there. Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate that. And yeah, don't forget, you've got the book to download, the newsletter. You've got all of the. Can you put all that stuff up again, Gerald, if you've got a, if you're still listening? And also the other live events coming up as well over the course of the year that you might be interested in. So from me, Rick Adams, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this series. I hope you found them useful, and I hope to see you on future events. Take care. Have a great rest of the day, however much is left for you, and we'll see you again sometime. Bye-bye for now. Thank you.